Good afternoon and welcome to today's wellness event. My name is Claire Varesio and I'm the community librarian at Cupertino Library. Thank you all for your support of our library and its programming. I'm very pleased to have you join us this afternoon for our program with Dr. Ronesh Sinha. And it's sponsored by Cupertino Library Foundation. And I would like to invite up to the podium the Cupertino Library Foundation Vice President, Gopal Murapan, who will be giving a few words about the foundation and also introducing today's speaker. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gopal Kumarapan. I'm one of the board members serving for the Library Foundation, Cupertino Library Foundation. And this program is brought to you by Cupertino Library as well as the Library Foundation jointly as part of the wellness series. That's why I think, as Claire mentioned, when you have a chance, make sure that you visit the city video site. And if you go there, you will see all the wellness program. And definitely, we will be adding this one as well as soon as it gets over. And also, I really take a really great privilege to introduce Dr. Ronesh Sinha for the second time, because last time when he was here, I had the privilege to introduce him. Well, before I go on to it, personally, I had a connection with Ronesh Sinha because when I was at Oracle, because he teaches and he comes and coaches many people at the many enterprise levels at the companies, and I got the privilege of getting advice by Ronesh Sinha, which changed completely my food habits and all other things. That's what, when I met him and he said, hey, you feel seems to be fit. I said, thanks to you. Because all of the things, credit goes to doctor, the way in which he coached, and literally religiously I follow many of his things, and of course a lot of things from the book as well. I want to make sure that I at least refer to it. If not, at least it reminds me of Dr. Ronesh Sinha. So I keep it next to my TV, so that whenever I see it, oh my God, okay, I should not eat this one, because he's staring at me very, very badly, kind of. So that's how it is. So I'll just have a quick intro. Because he has a lot, so we just summarized it in the flyer, so I just want to read it out for the people sitting at home. And again, if you're sitting in the couch, Dr. Ron may ask you to stand up after 30 minutes, so just be ready for it. Dr. Ronesh Sinha, author of the South Asian Health Solutions, the book which you will see there, and a two-time TEDx speaker, is an internal medicine physician in Silicon Valley who works for Sutter Health Palo Alto Medical Foundation to lead their employer wellness program. He has designed a successful health education and wellness program for over 16 major Silicon Valley companies. As I said, one of them were Oracle, where I got benefited out of him. And developed a dedicated group consult practice geared to individuals with diabetes and other heart disease risk factors. His groundbreaking work in reversing diabetes in culturally diverse populations has received global attention with the front cover stories in Fortune magazine and the LA Times. He blogs actively at culturalhealthsolutions.com and hosts a popular Bay Area weekly radio show on health. He's passionate about developing innovative, culturally tailored solutions to help diverse populations lead healthier lives. Really, really, again, thank you to welcome Ron to the dais. Going forward, he will make sure that you are really, really fit, like me. I hope so. Thank you so much, Doctor.
All right. It is a pleasure to be back here again. So today we're going to be talking about personalized nutrition. And nutrition is such a complicated topic, right? One week you're told to be low carb, the next week gluten-free. Is it low fat? Is it Mediterranean? What the heck are you guys supposed to do, right? I mean, even for me, my head spins between all the new studies that keep coming out, all the headlines. So I'm not going to pretend that this is going to get easier as time goes on, but I'm going to give you some of the fundamentals of how I approach my patients, my audience, when I try to navigate the complex world of nutrition. So I'll go through some of those principles. You already got a nice detailed intro and background behind my work, so let's jump right into the content here. So what we're going to talk about today is the first thing is the reason I call this talk personalized nutrition is because nutrition truly is very personal. When I see patients in my clinic, one person comes in, I look at their background and their labs, and there's a specific type of diet that will presumably work for them. That same diet may not work for the next patient that comes into my clinic. In fact, that same diet might actually have adverse effects on the patient if we're not careful. And I want to bring that up from the beginning because sometimes when we have a diet that might work really well for us, we might passionately, almost like religion, say, you've got to go on this sort of diet. It worked great for me, but it may not work really well for somebody else. So part of my approach is for you to understand what sort of diet works better for you. We'll go through some ways that you can understand based on your lab results what your risk type might be. So that's the first thing is I want you to be able to identify what is your individual risk type. So we'll go through that first. The second is we will go through some cutting-edge nutrition science. We'll go through some guidelines on what I think you should and shouldn't eat, especially based on your risk type. We'll talk about some pitfalls of some of the more recent popular diets out there. And then I added in here, probably the diet that I get the most questions on is the ketogenic diet. Everybody emails me about that when I have talks. Everyone brings up the keto diet because it is the #1 Google search diet in the world right now. So I'll give you some of my personal experience and thoughts on the keto diet as well. Okay, so these are 4 categories I like to use when I think about how to personalize nutrition. The first is I might try to determine whether you are somebody who is insulin resistant, and I'll go over what that means. The second I put as sort of, a slasher, inflammation or autoimmune, and I'll explain to you what that means. The third is a high LDL cholesterol type. LDL is a type of cholesterol which we'll discuss briefly, but some of my individuals have very high levels, and I'll teach you how that might change the way I make my dietary recommendations. And the last is a mixed disorder. Okay, so this, if you guys have watched any of my talks before, this is a slide I show everyone, and this is where I spend a little bit of time. Because every single person in this room needs to understand the concept of insulin resistance in detail, and this is a cartoon depiction in my book of how I explain this. The middle of the diagram has a car, okay, so let's call that your carbohydrates. This is the starches you might have had for breakfast or you're going to eat for lunch. That's the car, and there's 3 parking lots in the body. You've got the muscle on the top left, you've got the liver and the bottom left, and you've got the fat parking lot. Now, every time you consume carbohydrates, the carbohydrates, ideally, we want it to go to our muscle parking lots. Your muscle can take that rice, flatbreads, bagel, cereal, whatever, and burn that and turn that into energy. The way the carbs get to that muscle parking lot is by using a hormone called insulin. Insulin is like the parking pass that gets the carbs through the door. So when I say that most individuals develop diabetes, type 2 diabetes or heart disease because of insulin resistance, what I'm literally saying is your body is producing the hormone insulin, but the muscle is not responding to that pass. The muscle is saying, sorry, I'm not going to accept those carbohydrates. So now what happens? You've got this overflow carbohydrate traffic that has to go somewhere. And in each individual, it might go in different directions. The carbohydrates might go towards the fat parking lot, so those starches get converted into fat. And in certain ethnic groups in particular, we see it more as belly fat. It might go to the liver, and the liver can convert those carbohydrates into triglycerides or fat, which gets stored inside the liver, and the liver can pump that out in a form of fat called triglycerides or blood triglycerides. So really at a high level, my job is to teach you lifestyle changes so we can get those carbohydrates moving back towards the muscle, we can decompress some of that belly or body fat, and we can unload the liver. The liver is one of the epicenters for diabetes and a lot of chronic health conditions. When you tax your liver with chronic carbohydrates, toxins, processed foods, the liver becomes overwhelmed. It can't clear toxins. It can't process sugar. So we see all types of health maladies because we're overloaded. We're sending too much of that carbohydrate traffic and that toxin traffic in the direction of the liver. So that's basically at a high level what I want you to understand, and then we'll talk about the ways that you can determine whether you have insulin resistance. Now, one thing I do want to mention too, I see some kids here in the audience. This parking problem is happening at a rapid rate in children, especially children of Asian and Indian descent in particular. We're seeing a lot of fatty liver in kids that are 9 or 10 years old. And what's happening in that situation? What's happening to kids today, right? And I want to take a few moments to go over this. Kids today are spending more time bathing in screen light than sunlight, right? They're having a lot of sugar-processed drinks and foods. They go to, maybe, a lot of times parents tell me that, yeah, my kids don't have fast food, but they'll go to a coffee chain and they'll order frappuccinos, which to me are worse than anything you can find at McDonald's. And they walk out of it with whipped cream and everything. And what's happening in this situation is they're overwhelming their muscle capacity, and their muscles are not getting stronger because they're sitting all day. And now all that liquid carbohydrate, the Capri Suns, the frappuccinos, all that stuff's going to the liver. And we have 9, 10-year-old kids that are developing a fatty liver. Asians are at the highest risk of that. If kids have a fatty liver at the age of 9 or 10, their liver is not going to survive by the time they hit 20 or 30. And this is an epidemic. I'm not talking about an exceptional. This is happening all over. And in many families that we treat, we see that often the adult couples are doing well, but they're still feeding the same garbage to the kids. So if you don't take care of this at a family level, your kids are going to suffer at some point. I hate to be sort of dramatic about this, but my wife being a pediatrician, we're overwhelmed with how much of this we're seeing. Now, moving along. So how do we develop that our body has this carbohydrate traffic parking problem? There's some clues that you can get off your blood test. The first thing is if you get a cholesterol test done, look at your triglyceride level. If your triglycerides are higher than 150, that's already a sign that you've developed some insulin resistance. And ideal for me is I'd like to get triglycerides down to 100 or lower. Triglycerides are not emphasized enough in the clinic. In medical training, we tend to focus a lot on LDL, and triglycerides get ignored. To the point that there's a major, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a major healthcare system here in California, and they use a triglyceride cutoff of 500. So literally, if you have 400 or 350, you're going to be told you're fine, when in fact you have significant insulin resistance. The second thing is the HDL cholesterol. Think of H as being healthier, the good cholesterol. So a clue that you might have insulin resistance is, for males, if that number is less than 40, this number, the higher the better, and for females, if it's less than 50. Now, triglycerides, high triglycerides and low HDL tend to go together like peanut butter and jelly. Typically, you'll see both of them together, and that is definitely a sign that your body's having issues with insulin, the carbohydrates are moving in the wrong direction. Now, putting those labs aside, if we have increased belly fat, increased waist circumference, that's a sign that insulin resistance is probably at risk, and this is something we're seeing in young kids already. They're already developing little pot bellies. They're not getting physical activity, and even though their labs might be normal, they're destined to have fatty liver or insulin resistance very early in life. Elevated blood sugar, if your fasting glucose is consistently above 100, or there's a test called the A1C, which checks your average sugar for the last few months. If that's elevated above 5.7% or higher, that's also a sign that your body's not processing glucose properly. And lastly, keep in mind that insulin resistance does contribute to high blood pressure. Many of my patients that have persistently elevated blood pressure issues, when we fix their insulin problems, their blood pressure can often get better. Now, other clues that you might be at risk for insulin resistant is your actual ethnic background. There are certain ethnic groups that are very high risk of insulin resistance. Asian Indians, like myself and many of you sitting out there, we're seeing major epidemic insulin resistance in East Asians. In East Asians, I want to mention, so Asian Indians used to be the diabetes capital of the world, but now China is about to pass us up. So for those of you that are competitive, Indians can no longer take pride in being number one in diabetes. China's about to pass us up, and they have the largest, escalation over the last decade. Hispanics, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, within Pacific Islanders, Filipinos in particular, are very parallel to Asian Indians in terms of their risks also. So these are high-risk ethnic groups. Other clues are based on what I call non-specific overlapping symptoms, difficulty losing weight despite you exercising and doing a relatively healthy diet. Having chronic or excessive fatigue, sugar cravings that are just not going away, these can be some clues that you have an insulin-type phenotype. Conditions, these are conditions, diabetes, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned before, when I'm talking about diabetes, I am actually referring to type 2 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, your body is not able to make the parking pass, right? But in type 2 diabetes, your body's overproducing the insulin parking pass, and that excess insulin can cause more trouble. It causes you to store more body fat, it causes inflammation at the blood vessel level. So conditions that are also clues to insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is becoming a very common syndrome worldwide, but especially we see a lot of this in Asian Indian females and teenagers, starting to see it in East Asians as well too. If you want to learn more about PCOS, please look up my blog post on polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is very important. Any of you out there that have young daughters, this is becoming an epidemic. Your diet itself can put you at risk for PCOS, and that can lead to infertility, higher heart disease risk, and things later on. I grew up with a lot of friends and family community members years, and I didn't know at that time that many of these girls had PCOS growing up. They had acne, they had facial hair, they had excess obesity, they were teased, and it was a very difficult childhood they went through, and they never knew that they had PCOS, and that's manifested later in life into infertility and other issues, so be aware of that. If you had diabetes during pregnancy, that's a sign that you have insulin resistance and your future offspring also have higher risk of insulin resistance. Fatty liver, gout, a skin condition called acanthosis, and I put Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is intimately linked to insulin resistance right now. So people that have type 2 diabetes, their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease is significantly higher. So if you're not afraid of heart disease, hopefully Alzheimer's disease is something we take seriously because we're seeing rapid escalations in type 2 diabetics and those that have insulin resistance. So that's one type, okay? So that's the insulin resistant type that we talked about. The next type is what I sort of call gut or autoimmunity and inflammation. And so what I mean by this basically is if we look at the things that are introduced into our body from the environment, so this could be the foods that we eat, the emotions that we experience, drugs, pesticides, etc., from maybe produce that we're eating, that is the outer environment that's coming into our body. And when that goes inside our body, it reaches our digestive tract. And what you need to understand is the majority of our immune system is actually centered and headquartered in our digestive tract. So when we're eating the types of foods or exposed to chronic stress or toxins, it literally causes our immune system alarm to go on chronically at a low level, and we call that inflammation. Now, everybody thinks that inflammation is a bad thing, avoid inflammation. Inflammation helps us survive. It's an alarm system that's supposed to work intermittently, episodically, to protect us against infection or immune system or help us heal injury. But when you're on a daily basis exposed to chronic stress, eating the same foods you or your kids that are triggering inflammation, that's what can be linked to all types of health maladies. And what it literally can do is those external factors can actually cause your intestinal lining to become leaky or actually compromised. So all of a sudden, these cells that should be tightly together, they start to separate, and all of those toxins can actually leak into the bloodstream and cause more inflammation. So a lot of individuals that have a lot of digestive discomfort, chronic digestive issues, even though they may not think they have inflammation, that's an early warning sign that their body type does have inflammation. So these are some clues that you might have this autoimmune inflammation, and I see so much of this in my clinic. As much as I'm diabetes focused, so many of my individuals have some manifestations of inflammation, starting with the skin, chronic rashes, eczema, psoriasis, muscle joints, right? X-rays might look fine, but you've got chronic aches and pains. Digestive, chronic bloating, acidity, constipation, diarrhea, changes in your bowel habits. Neurological, brain fog is a really common complaint. Headaches, migraines, cognitive issues, memory loss. Non-specific overlap symptoms like I talked about, fatigue or just difficulty losing weight no matter what you do. When your body's under chronic inflammation, it's a threat. And especially in a woman's body, when a woman's body is under threat, you know what it does? It puts lock and key on its fat cells. It does not allow you to release fat cells. Despite you going to boot camps 5 days a week and doing the ketogenic diet and fasting, you will not lose an ounce. You'll probably gain weight over time. And for many women, that might be familiar. And that's because your body is chronically inflamed. It's using that fat as a protective mechanism. Autoimmune conditions, I'm seeing so much of this in my clinic. I'm not an autoimmune expert. Again, I'm really focused on diabetes and heart disease, but we're seeing a lot of women, especially in men also, developing things like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, neurological conditions that never existed in the family. They come to the US and all of a sudden multiple sclerosis and other autoimmune type issues, inflammatory bowel disease like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's. All these conditions, they look back at their family thinking, my aunt, my mom, my grandmother, they never had it. What the heck is going on to me here in the US that's causing me to develop these conditions? And it's really those lifestyle factors that we just talked about in the prior slide. Those environmental factors are having a major impact on the immune system. So these are some clues to inflammation. That's the second category. The third category is individuals that have persistently elevated LDL cholesterol levels. So you check their cholesterol panel, and the LDL is a type of cholesterol there. And this number is arbitrary. It varies. For some people, an LDL cholesterol of above 130 might be dangerous. For others, it might be above 160, 190. But I put as an average, if that number is above 160, despite following the insulin-resistant and anti-inflammatory approaches, that might be something of risk. And then I tell people that although some of this can be genetic, we've got to evaluate your gut health. We'll talk about this in a second. But if your gut health is compromised, your LDL levels can stay elevated despite all of the interventions that you're trying. You might have to consider a significant reduction in animal meat and dairy and shifting to more of a plant-based diet if that LDL is not coming down. I know a lot of you might have tried the ketogenic diet and you read the headlines saying, hey, meat and butter is great, but if you're a high LDL type, meat and butter may not be very good for you. There's genetic variation in how we process saturated fat. So genes can play a major role, and there are conditions like familial hypercholesterolemia, or what we call FH, where LDL levels are significantly high, above 230 or higher, and that's really a genetic factor, and then we have to address that in a different way. And then mixed type, unfortunately I see a lot of this. These are individuals that might have some combination of being insulin resistant, maybe some autoimmune inflammation and or LDL type. And obviously you have more cumulative risk. I see a lot of overlapping individuals that come with insulin resistance and inflammation. And what I want to tell you is, as much as I'm trying to simplify things by creating these categories for you, they do intermix. Insulin resistance itself is actually an inflammatory condition. If you've got high levels of insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, your blood vessels are inflamed in your brain, in your heart. So they do feed off one another. So just keep that in mind. And then we might, in a mixed type, have to use a combination of dietary strategies to address whatever your underlying risk type is. Now, additional personalization, in some cases, most of my patients that I see in my clinic, I don't need to order a bunch of expensive tests. Usually I can look at their waistline, I can look at a few basic factors, some standard labs, and come to my determinations. But in some individuals, there are advanced high-fidelity testing that we can do. We can look at genetic markers, we can evaluate your gut microbiome, we can do micronutrient and metabolite type testing, hormonal evaluation, and toxin exposures. These can all help us come to more specific recommendations regarding your diet. Okay, so now let's talk about what we do. So again, you may not know what type you fall into, but I want to give you some general categories which will hit two birds with one stone. What are the foods that we can remove that can help improve our insulin status and lower inflammation? We want to remove sugar and fructose as much as we possibly can. Sugar and fructose will elevate insulin resistance and cause inflammation as well. The dangerous fats like trans fats and mostly vegetable oils, those are key factors we need to limit in our diet. Artificial sweeteners are something we have to be aware of. I'm going to talk about this in a slide coming up, but now the new generation of diet foods, the food companies have figured out. It's no longer, remember back in the low-fat days, wow, Entenmann's low-fat pastries, I used to eat those things thinking I was doing good for my body. The food industry has figured out that, okay, low-fat's no longer fashionable. It's all about sugar-free. Right? Sugar-free bars and things like that. Well, they put artificial sweeteners in them, and those artificial sweeteners feed the unhealthy bacteria in your gut and cause even more inflammation. I'm not saying they're worse than sugar, but they do different adverse things to your body that regular sugar doesn't actually do. So be very careful about artificial sweeteners. Excess carbohydrates, even good ones. So if you have outstripped your muscle parking capacity, an extra serving of whole wheat multigrain toast, an extra serving of steel-cut oats, there's no valet parking space in your full parking lot, muscle parking lot, for steel-cut oats or whole wheat flatbreads. Once your muscle parking lot's full, any excess carbohydrates beyond that is going to be converted into fat in your liver and cause glucose elevations. And this is a key point because most of the individuals that I see in Silicon Valley, so my practice is in Los Altos, my patients and entrepreneurs that come to see me, they're not getting fat, they're not getting diabetic and heart disease off eating pizza and Coke, they're getting diabetic off eating too much quinoa, too much whole wheat flatbreads, too much multigrain toast, too much oatmeal, in the context of the fact that their muscles are not active and it's not clearing parking space on a regular basis. So be very careful even about the healthy carbohydrates in your diet because in excess amounts it can cause trouble. Other potential culprits might be things like gluten and dairy, which can elevate inflammation in the body. I never really was on the gluten bandwagon many years ago, but I am starting to see a lot of individuals that have significant gluten sensitivity. And when we remove gluten from the diet, which is a protein in wheat, we often see that they will lose weight, their thyroid will recover, other things can happen, their brain fog might clear up, so it is something to think about. And again, packaged, processed, and most restaurant foods have some combination of these ingredients. You might go to an Asian restaurant or an Indian restaurant. You might go to an ethnic restaurant and order low-carb foods that are high protein and think you're doing great. And I love eating out, so I'm not discouraging people from eating out. But if every lunch you work at Cisco or some other company where you're going to the same cafe that's nearby and you're eating low-carb, keep in mind that most restaurants are using the lowest quality oils you can imagine. And those will trigger more inflammation in your body than excess carbohydrates or sugar. And they recycle the oil. They're not cleaning out the pan every time they make this certain curry. They're using the same oil over and over and over. And recycling and heating that oil is going to raise inflammation levels in the body despite you being low carb. Okay, so that's one thing to really keep in mind. Now, why am I focused on vegetable oils so much? Because they're ubiquitous. If you go to Trader Joe's or any food and you're picking up foods and just looking at the headline label, you got to turn it over and see, does it say soybean oil? Does it say canola oil? Those are a type of oil called omega-6s, specifically linoleic acid, which I'm going to abbreviate LA, okay? LA, what that type of oil does is it builds up inside our cells. Our cell membranes are made up of oil, of fat. And O6, this LA, goes inside that cell membrane and it damages the cell membranes. It becomes very susceptible to oxidation and inflammation. This next slide I want to show you is actually very compelling to me. So this is a very well-known diet researcher named Dr. Stephen Guyenet, and he's basically showing that from 1960 till now, what they did is they're evaluating how much linoleic acid is found in our cell membranes, in our body fat. And you can see for the chimpanzee, it's flat, from back in the 1960s to current. If you look back to 1960, we had less than 9–10% linoleic acid in our body fat. But as we go to modern times now, it's gone up to almost 25% because we're eating so much processed food. So our cell membranes are loaded with this highly inflammatory linoleic acid. So when you're eating these packaged products, you're going to restaurants constantly, you're loading your cells with linoleic acid. And that inflammation can lead to arthritis, to brain fog, to autoimmune conditions. And the thing is, if you decided today, I'm going to stop introducing linoleic acid into my body, it's going to take your body about 9 to 12 months minimum to start to rebuild its cell membranes. It's not going to happen overnight. So for many of my individuals that make the right dietary changes, some will start feeling benefits right away, but if their cell membranes are loaded with linoleic acid, it's going to take several months for them to remodel those cell membranes, and then they feel like a new person maybe 6, 9, 12 months down the road. So the way to really remodel our cell membranes is we need to optimize the types of fats we're taking in through the diet. You want to improve your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Omega-3, unlike the linoleic acid, the omega-6s, those are your anti-inflammatory fats. So basically, in our diet, we want to get more of the O3s and less of the O6s. So this diagram and image shows that we want to cut down the omega-6s from those vegetable oils, from mayonnaise, from processed foods that have those O6s. We want to boost up our omega-3s on the bottom there, sardines, cold water fish if your diet allows it, omega-3 fortified eggs maybe, flaxseed or green leafy vegetables if you can't take in marine sources because of dietary restrictions. These are the ways to really optimize that ratio over time. Now, to highlight, again, we now have a new generation of diet foods, right? It's no longer low-fat Entenmann's pastries. Now we've got low-carb, we've got gluten-free foods, we've got packaged foods that are labeled this way. But if we don't read the fine print, guess what? These foods have tons of omega-6s and artificial sweeteners, so they're doing a different type of damage to our body. So keep that in mind. So many of these low-carb, gluten-free packaged foods will have these types of things. I've found that some of these artificial sweeteners, despite, in addition to causing damage to the gut, they still taste very sweet. If you get that Costco sort of low-carb, sugar-free, high-protein bar, they taste very sweet. So to me, they're not very satiating. An hour or two later, I feel like eating something sweet again. So they still alter our taste bud profile and make us crave more sweet foods. So be very aware of those, okay? And then, I put an image there. I didn't put the brand name, but have you guys seen these things popping up at the registry lines, like these high-protein cookies and brownies that are coming up? They put whey protein powder in them, but they also put all types of other elements and bad types of oils, but they know that everybody's after low-carb, high-protein. So literally, they'll put like less than 2 grams of carb, 15 grams of protein. You can find them at GNC and fitness stores. And people are literally eating these cookies thinking they're like on low carb now. They're doing great. And maybe initially your blood sugar may not look fine, but you're transforming your gut bacteria. You're transforming those cell membranes. And I'm not banning these. Once in a while, having this is fine. I've done this before too. You're in an airport, you're stuck. I'm like, okay, this is the best of the worst. I'll eat it. But if on a regular basis, this is what you stock in your work office cabinet, in the glove compartment of your car when you commute to work, you're having this every day, you're packing it in your kids' lunch, it's going to change their cell membrane. So really be aware of that. So how do we pick the right foods? We want to focus again on foods that lower inflammation, that prevent insulin resistance, foods that maximize nutrient density. I'll give you some very specific examples. And then you want to think about combinations of food. This is something people don't realize. When you mix together the right types of foods, it has an incredible synergistic effect that can elevate the amounts of nutrients your body's getting. So we'll go over some of those principles. So to jump right in, seasonal cruciferous vegetables. Oh my God, cruciferous vegetables are one of the best plants you can put in your body. These cruciferous vegetables have chemicals, which I'll talk about in a moment, and they are anti-cancer fighting. They're anti-inflammatory. I always get a question for people that Google research and nutrition a lot. They're like, what about my thyroid? No, cruciferous vegetables, unless you are making tons of broccoli, kale smoothies and eating loads and pounds of cruciferous vegetables, it will not have an adverse effect on thyroid function. If anything, if you eat it in moderate amounts, it will lower inflammation and have a beneficial effect on thyroid function. So, fall, winter coming up, there's a whole variety. Some of us get stuck on the same 2 or 3 cruciferous vegetables, but there's a beautiful array of cruciferous vegetables that we can take advantage of seasonally. When I'm really lazy and overwhelmed, again, thank God for Trader Joe's. Sorry for those of you listening from other parts of the world, but have you guys seen this one, the 5-minute Cruciferous Crunch? This is when I'm really feeling lazy, because literally they have a package at Trader Joe's called Cruciferous Crunch. It's got 4 or 5 different types of cruciferous vegetables. And when I'm feeling really lazy, I tear this baby open. I throw it into a wok or pan. I put some avocado oil, maybe olive oil with that. I'll add some black pepper and turmeric. It takes me less than 2 to 3 minutes to make this. And you are introducing unbelievable amounts of anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer nutrients in your body. When I have more time, I'm not as lazy. I'll shred and cut these vegetables up myself. My wife will do this, and we'll basically stir fry this. But it's nice to know that we have some of these convenient options available. Now, with leafy vegetables, do not forget spinach. Spinach is such a wonderful source of plant-based iron for those of you that can't consume iron from animal-based sources. It's a great source of magnesium. Magnesium. Why is magnesium important? You guys might have heard the biological compound called ATP, which is our energy currency. Well, guess what? That ATP chemical molecule in the bottom left there, it cannot work. It will not become active unless it is bonded to magnesium. So if we're not getting enough magnesium in our diet, we're not activating ATP appropriately. So that's why spinach is beautiful, because it's a good source of plant-based magnesium. I add vitamin C because with plant-based iron sources, vitamin C increases the bioavailability of iron. Your body will be able to absorb more iron. Other sources of dietary magnesium: seeds, nuts, fish, dairy like yogurt or kefir, good old avocados. And I know I put dark chocolate last because people tend to single that one out and they kind of forget the other ones. But dark chocolate, 70% plus, or sometimes I'll make smoothies and I'll put dark chocolate powder in there. It can be a very potent, great source of magnesium. So speaking of that, here's a smoothie recipe that I do at least 3 to 4 times a week. I didn't put proportions because I'm not that specific. I never did well in chemistry lab, so I'll get my Vitamix, I'll throw in some spinach or leafy greens, I'll put some nuts and seeds in there, I'll put some avocados, I'll put some good quality dark cacao powder in there, and yogurt or almond milk base too. I said good quality dark cacao powder because there are some bad quality ones out there. And the bad forms of chocolate and cacao powder are loaded with a heavy metal called cadmium. Be aware of that, because if you're having smoothies every day with dark cacao powder or eating bad quality dark chocolate, although you're getting some anti-inflammatory effect, you're accumulating heavy metals in your body. So look up high quality products, low cadmium. You can use a website like Consumer Lab. You do have to pay a small subscription for that, but they vet these products. So third-party vendors can look at good cacao products to see which ones are the best ones to use. But this is a way to really boost your magnesium levels. Now, fats, monounsaturated fats are a type of fat specifically that is so wonderful at lowering inflammation. So when you hear about the health benefits of the Mediterranean diet, a lot of the fats that you're getting through the Mediterranean diet are coming through monounsaturated fats. So these lower inflammation and they can have a beneficial impact on insulin resistance. So olives and olive oil, avocados and avocado oil, nuts, particularly almonds, cashews, seeds, all these things have good, healthy amounts of monounsaturated fat. So try to introduce that more with cooking, with dressings, with sauces. Now, omega-3s we talked about. I put that reminder diagram at the bottom, how we want to optimize the ratio. I do want to emphasize the fact that this also lowers inflammation and insulin resistance. We want to optimize our ratio. It also has beneficial impacts on mood and cognitive function. So there are a growing number of studies that show that when people improve their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, it can lower depression and anxiety. Because when we think of our brain and our brain cells, when you optimize that balance of that membrane, that omega-3 to omega-6, your neurons fire much more efficiently. It can have mood-enhancing impacts. So definitely optimizing that ratio by boosting omega-3s and lowering omega-6s. I've seen in many patients after 6-9 months, they just feel better. And some, just for making these changes, they're off their antidepressants. They didn't realize that it was a membrane composition that needed to be changed over time. Now, I get a lot of questions about omega-3s because the news research keeps going back and forth on this. I get questions about supplements and capsules. I can't go into depth on this, but I did a very detailed blog post on that. So if you go to my blog and just type omega-3 into the window, within the past year, I did a very detailed guide on omega-3. So be sure to check that as a reference. Now, I get questions about what cooking fat should we use. This is really important. So I still am a big fan of using monounsaturated fats like good old-fashioned extra virgin olive oil. If you want something that's a little bit more flavor neutral, you don't want the olive oil flavor in some of your cooking dishes, then I'm a fan of avocado oil, wonderful monounsaturated fat that's very heat stable. I do want to tell you that extra virgin olive oil gets a bit of a bad rap because of its heat instability, but you can cook most foods with extra virgin olive oil as long as it's not above 400 to 500. So I tell people, if your pan is really smoking and sizzling, if you're really doing high temperature cooking, olive oil is probably not the best thing, but most of the vegetable dishes that I make are low to medium temperature stir fries. Because once you get to really high temperatures, you're searing those vegetables. You might be losing out on a lot of the beneficial products of that particular vegetable. So keep in mind that I do use extra virgin olive oil for a lot of my vegetable stir fries and cooking. I put some other sources too, coconut oil, maybe organic butter, ghee, which is clarified butter. Now keep in mind, again, we talked about the LDL type. If you have very high levels of LDL cholesterol, we might have to cut back on the saturated fats like coconut oil or organic butter or ghee and focus more on avocado oil, omega-3s, and healthier anti-inflammatory fats. Avoid most seed-based oils. Sunflower, safflower, canola, these are still very staple oils that are used in many of my patients' kitchens and households, and I remind them that these are loaded with that omega-6. Many of the corporate cafeterias, even in the best companies that I've gone to, they're still using these oils. So despite the dishes and the ingredients being healthy, they're still using these oils. I've hardly been able to convince a single company to use better quality oils, and it does come down to costs, but just be aware of these types of oils. And all fats, I tell people, use in moderation. I know there's the low-carb, high-fat ketogenic diet, but especially if you have LDL tendencies, I tell people diversify your fat portfolio and focus on using maybe a little bit less, especially if you're having issues with losing those last few pounds or if LDL cholesterol levels tend to remain high. Now, red meat is a very polarizing topic. I blog on red meat quite a bit, but some similar issues with red meat is, number one, you want to make sure you're eating very good quality red meat if you are consuming red meat, grass-fed, organic whenever possible. Again, if you're saturated fat sensitive, limit the red meat intake as much as you can. But regardless of what sort of diet you follow, I tell people with meat, including red meat, that should be your side dish. The first generation of Atkins that came out, right? I remember what people were eating. Huge slabs of red meat. There were no vegetables on the side. I remember people eating red meat with a side of bacon, for God's sake. It was so ridiculous. And some people, as part of some popular diet trends, are still doing that because they see that because of their carbs being low, they feel better. They're losing body fat. They feel so much energy. But I want to tell you, that is not a marker that your diet is optimal for longevity. I can easily go on a red meat diet for the next 2 weeks. I can shed more body fat and feel great. But what am I doing over decades? What am I doing to my gut microbial profile? What am I doing for longevity? You have to be aware of that. So for me, meat is really more of a side dish to the vegetables on my plate. And yeah, there's sometimes I like having a large steak, maybe after a big workout where I want to amp my protein up. I might do that. But don't use just your glucose levels and your waistline and your energy as an excuse for you to eat mounds and mounds of meat. I see that a lot in my clinic, and I have to kind of teach people to reintroduce plant-based foods alongside those meats in moderation. Now, what about dairy? So dairy, same thing. It's all about sourcing organic, grass-fed when possible. Whole milk is fine. There's numbers of studies in pediatric childhood obesity that show that skim milk or fat-free milk causes more obesity in kids than whole milk, believe it or not. Because whole milk is more micronutrient rich, it's got healthier anti-inflammatory fats, and it's more satiating, right? I mean, skim milk is very diluted. It basically tastes like water. It doesn't keep kids as satiated throughout the day. But for most individuals, doing good sourced, good quality grass-fed whole milk and organic is perfectly fine. Hard cheeses, especially grass-fed, is okay. Grass-fed butters, and then yogurts are obviously a great probiotic source as well too. So I love doing full-fat Greek yogurts or yogurt kefir that are not sweetened. These can be good ways of optimizing your gut bacteria and lowering inflammation. Now with gut health, you probably read a lot about gut health. I want to make a few points about this. So one critical thing about gut health, so let me just explain to you because this can get a little bit complicated, but the reason there is such a huge focus now on gut-friendly foods is when you eat gut-friendly foods, which we'll talk about in a second, what happens literally in your body is when that food reaches your digestive tract, the healthy bacteria in your gut will convert those foods into a type of fatty acid called short-chain fatty acids. So I abbreviated this, we sometimes call these SCFAs, SCFAs, and those short-chain fatty acids, they're anti-inflammatory. They lower inflammation. They help your body burn fat. They're optimal for your immune system. They do multiple positive things in your body. So when we say that you want to be on a gut-friendly diet and we want your gut health to be optimized, we want your gut to be full of the right types of bacteria that can convert the food that you eat into these short-chain fatty acids. Now, how do we do that? How do we get that friendly bacteria in our gut? Well, you think of two different types of food. The first is prebiotics. This is not probiotics. Prebiotics are the foods that will feed the healthy bacteria in your gut. Okay, so this is, oops, sorry about that. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, so these basically are the foods. Technical difficulties. 1 second. There we go. Let's try it one more time. Okay, so these are the foods basically that will feed that healthy bacteria. And I put a whole list of this. You can look up prebiotic foods, but when you introduce more of these foods into your body, now you're making the healthy bacteria much happier. Okay, so this is kind of like the fertilizer that helps the good bacteria grow. Now that's prebiotics. Eat a variety of these types of foods. Now probiotics, let me put this in here. Probiotics are the actual bacteria. You're actually introducing the bacteria into your body that will be feeding off those prebiotic fertilizer foods. So I actually put this into different categories because just looking at our audience, we're very ethnically diverse. And in most ethnic groups, we have some natural probiotic foods that can really optimize our gut health. So dairy, yogurt, kefir, lassi, not the mango lassi guys from the restaurant, but homemade, unsweetened lassi if we can, or minimally sweetened lassi or salted lassi, cheeses. For East Asian foods, especially Korean food, kimchi, natto, miso, kombucha, Indian foods, pickle chutneys, idli, dosa, uttapam, all these, especially if they're homemade with really fresh ingredients, they're in the right context. These can be great foods to accompany your diet. And then other foods like pickles, sauerkraut, etc. So I try a combination of these foods, and I like to put a side of this with a lot of my meals. Now, I did put a disclaimer again. Coming back to food companies, they've realized that probiotics are a big catchword, right? So they're putting probiotics in Fruit Loops. They're putting it everywhere right now. So be aware of the fact that many probiotic foods, like that come in a tiny bottle, they've got tons of sugar in them, okay? They make them taste. A lot of the yogurt probiotic drinks have all types of other artificial ingredients, sugar and fructose in them. So that just doesn't make sense. You're putting bacteria, healthy bacteria in your body, but then you're feeding it with sugar and other ingredients that are going to actually feed the wrong types of bacteria. So be very careful with the probiotic type claims that are put on a lot of nutrition labels. Now, the other thing that we see is, people often ask me about what is the ideal composition of the different foods that we should put on our plate. And this varies in most people, but I tell them no matter what diet you're on, plant-based, meat-based, or whatever, we really want to fill up that plate with at least half vegetables and a variety of different vegetables like we talked about. Another corner of this plate is going to be protein, high-quality, diverse protein. Another corner is going to be the orange, the carbohydrates and the starches. And pick starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes, things that are going to feed the healthy types of bacteria. And then we've got that sliver there for healthy fats. Now, I always get the question from my vegetarians, what about us poor vegetarians? We don't have enough protein sources. There's plenty of good quality protein sources for vegetarians. I put a list of them up there, but I also did a dedicated blog post on optimal ways to increase vegetarian protein. So if you go to my blog, put in vegetarian protein, you'll get a very detailed list of the different types of vegetarian proteins you can introduce into your diet. So not difficult to do. All right, sorry, let me just get this back here. Okay. So now I want to talk to you about a concept called nutrient bioavailability. Now what I mean by this is if all of us in the room today ate the exact same lunch, everything's identical on the plate, guess what? Some of us are going to get maybe 20, 25% of the nutrients from that plate. Others might get 40%. Others might get less than 5%. So there is tremendous variability in what amount of nutrients we extract from our foods. So literally when we talk about nutrient bioavailability, we're talking about what percent of that nutrient that you're putting in your mouth is going to get inside your cells to perform its intended action. So I tell people from a finance perspective, it's kind of like your gross versus net income, right? So my boys in the back there are selling books. I told them, I'm going to contribute some of the funds towards their college education. And if I told them that, you know what, you'll get $200. And then when it's time for me to pay them, I give them $100. I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? You told me you're giving me $200 and I gave them $100. They're going to wonder what happened to the other $100, right? So net income is sort of like bioavailability. You're basically reading a nutrition label that's telling you that you're going to get 500 milligrams of calcium from this particular food, but depending on how you eat that food, what condition you're in, what's accompanying that food, what is your mental state and your stress state, you might only get 100 milligrams of calcium from that. And you're wondering why your bone density scan shows that you've got osteopenia and osteoporosis. So there is variability here, and there's multiple factors. What form is that nutrient in? What are the other foods that you're eating that food with? What is your digestive pattern? If you're somebody with chronic bloating, acidity, gas, all this stuff, you're not extracting nutrients properly from those foods. We have to fix your gut issues so you can pull more money out of that food, okay? We might check your gut bacterial profile, and then stress levels are a big factor. They can limit your body from extracting nutrients. Now, some examples of bioavailability. So for those of you, again, I'm not making any claims that animal-based diets are better than plant-based, but I'm just making some specific examples so you're sort of aware of the differences. So we see a lot of B12 deficiency in the clinic. So vitamin B12 from animals like meat and dairy, is far more bioavailable than that coming from plants. So a lot of individuals, vegans that are think they're getting B12 from algae like spirulina or chlorella, guess what? That's not real B12. It's a form of B12 called pseudo B12, and pseudo B12 does not have the same biological action as regular B12. It can falsely make your B12 level look normal, but it's not actually biologically active B12. So be very careful about thinking that you might actually be optimizing B12 levels by taking algae and things like that. Now, iron from animals, so iron in the heme form, that's heme iron, the iron that comes from animals. If you're getting iron from plants like spinach, etc., that's the non-heme form. And actually, there's a significant difference between both. So the iron from animal-based foods is more bioavailable. Now, again, I'm not telling people to go on an animal-based diet based on this, but you do have to be aware of that. So you might have to increase your volume of plant-based iron. And then you have to remember that if you want to extract more iron from plant-based foods like spinach, for example, vitamin C will help you do that. So you make a salad dressing with, let's say, kale, which is a great source of iron, lemon juice or some mandarin oranges, some vitamin C with that will help you extract more of that iron from that plant-based iron source. Omega-3s, so the DHA and EPA are the active omega-3s that lower inflammation in the body and have all the beneficial impacts we talked about earlier. ALA is the type of omega-3 that you get from plants. The ALA itself will not have much beneficial impact on the body. It needs to be converted into DHA and EPA. But look at the conversion rates. It's about 8% that you get conversion to EPA, and that really brain-healthy DHA, it's only about 0 to 4%. So again, you've got to keep these things in mind. In some of these cases, we might recommend adequate or smart supplementation to help amp up people's omega-3 levels, or they really have to go a little bit more intensive on their plant-based diet to really try to maximize some of these nutrients. Turmeric, putting a spice up there, so whenever you combine turmeric with black pepper, you increase its bioavailability by 2,000%. And the beautiful thing is, again, with natural cooking, we often do that anyway. We're putting black pepper with turmeric and other spices, and that's elevating the amount of turmeric you extract. Cooking with a high-quality oil will also allow you to extract more of that turmeric from that base. So really interesting things that you can do to elevate bioavailability. Now, coming back to my favorite class of vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, here's a trick that you need to know. Cruciferous vegetables, the specific types of chemicals in cruciferous vegetables that have the anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory impact are a group of phytonutrients called sulforaphanes, okay? Now, when you eat broccoli in its native form, it doesn't have active sulforaphanes. It has a precursor called glucosinolates. Let's just call that GS and SP. So we want to be able to convert the GS into SP by using an enzyme called myrosinase. I know this sounds very complicated, but in essence, if we don't activate that middle enzyme in the body, you're not going to get that beneficial phytonutrient. So what can we do to make sure that enzyme's active and that we produce that? Well, number one, the raw cruciferous vegetables tend to have more of those SPs than cooked ones. But when we cook the vegetables, there's a few things that you can do to activate the enzyme. The first thing is if you have broccoli and cauliflower, you chop it up before and you let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes minimum. If you let the chopped broccoli, chopping itself will basically activate the enzyme. If it sits for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes, you'll get even more of the SPs when you actually cook the food. I know a lot of us on the run, we're rushing, we're chopping, we put it in the pan already. You will get some SPs from it, but if you want to maximize that SP, this is what you want to do. Now, let's say you didn't have time to do that. Dinner's, your kids are waiting, family's waiting. There's one other trick you can do. You can add 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of mustard powder. Mustard powder basically will act as that enzyme to convert it into SPs too. So this is amazing, right? Because this is how a lot of us cook anyway. And intuitively, we're doing a lot of these things. We're adding black pepper and turmeric. We're adding mustard powder. And really, scientifically, we're seeing from a chemical basis, we're actually elevating the nutrients that can help heal our bodies. So, Ayurveda, other types of science, Chinese medicine, herbalists, these are a lot of the things that they intentionally do to really maximize the anti-inflammatory effects in the body. And then broccoli sprouts have become very popular. Broccoli sprouts in a small volume, so often I'll add these to salads, they have a much higher density of SPs than regular broccoli. So some cool things you can do to get the most out of those cruciferous vegetables. Okay? Now, optimizing meal and snack composition. What I mean by this is sometimes, you're stuck. You're driving on the I-5 to LA. All you got are fast food restaurants everywhere. You're like, what the heck am I going to do? So sometimes what you have to do is you have to be creative. So the interesting thing is they did a study where they looked at people that were eating burgers. I don't think these are very high-quality grass-fed burgers. And what they did was they measured blood flow in their arteries. And they found with a single serving of a burger, the blood flow in their arteries dropped down by 27%. That's not good. Their blood flow went down by 27% with one serving of a burger. But guess what? When they added an avocado to the burger, that reduction in the blood flow was only 4%. Right? The blood flows are actually healthier when you add an avocado to a burger than you eat a regular burger. So we actually, when I travel and go on long road trips, avocados are my best friend. I have avocados with me, or if I don't have that with me, can I get a guac burger? Can I put some guac on that? If there's a place like a fast food joint or something that has a salad bar, can I do some things to minimize the damaging effects of that low quality burger? I'm always thinking about that. You go to a pizza joint, okay? Have the salad. Your kids, you cannot have the cheese pizza unless you eat the salad, okay? That's just a rule. You cannot just jump into a cheese pizza or whatever until you eat the salad first. Use a non-sweet vinegar-based dressing because that's going to have an even better impact, and then eat the pizza after that. So these are things that I'm constantly grappling with because our environment is completely imperfect. You have to look for ways that you can do this. Okay, so now if you want to really increase bioavailability, you want to pick the most nutrient-dense foods you can possibly find. I mean, when you look per capita at each of these foods, and I'm sorry for those of you that are vegetarian, some of these are not going to be appealing, but these per capita have the most bioavailable nutrients in it. Organ meats, like liver, like today I went to Trader Joe's and I picked up some chicken pate, or, liver is an unbelievable source of almost every micronutrient you can think of, and it's completely bioavailable to your body. Shellfish, like oysters, oh my God, if you guys like oysters, once or twice a week. That's all you need, and you will get most of the essential micronutrients in your body. Sardines, again, you'll get a lot of micronutrients. You'll also get some collagen from the bones and organs that come with that. Herbs and spices, tremendous. We talked about turmeric already. Bone broth is very popular. Now with the colder winter weather, bone broth is a great way to get collagen and other anti-inflammatory nutrients. Egg yolks obviously are key for getting adequate vitamins and micronutrients, and then sprouts, especially broccoli sprouts. Literally with the organ meats and shellfish, if you had Liver, if your diet allows it, you have that once or twice a week, and shellfish once or twice a week. That stuff gets stored inside your cells in your body. That's better than taking a vitamin supplement with these micronutrients every single day. Your body really absorbs this. And my kids love it. When I, spread that on some crackers, some bread, whatever, they're getting a great dose of multiple micronutrients. Okay, so now common deficiencies. Again, I said, for vegans and vegetarians, we have a little bit, unfortunately, there's an issue with bioavailability and absorbing some of the key nutrients. And these are some of the most common nutrients that we see are deficient. We talked about B12 already. We talked about iron, non-heme versus heme iron, vitamin D. Calcium can be deficient, zinc can be deficient, and then the omega-3s, we talked about the poor conversion of ALA into these. So just be aware of this, okay? I do a lot of blog writings on how to maximize impact of a lot of these, but these are some deficiencies you might be at risk for. Now, stress, I just wanted to put this key point up. There was a study that was done, and I couldn't find the reference for the study, but this is a few years ago, where they took people that ate handfuls of almonds, and they had people basically eat it at different rates. So some people just threw the almonds down their mouth, they chewed it really fast, and they swallowed it like you might do when you're in the middle of a meeting or you're on the run. And what they did was then they measured the bloodstream to see what % of nutrients did they extract from the almonds, like the healthy fats and oils in there. And it's incredible. People that eat really fast, they're extracting 20, 30, 40% less nutrients from those nuts and almonds that they eat. So even if you're buying the best quality salad, you take it to work and you're eating in front of a computer screen, you're throwing it down your mouth as fast as you can so you can go on to your next meeting, or you're sitting in the car, whatever you're doing, when you are activating the sympathetic system, what that does, that stress system, it slows down digestion and absorption. Right now, if this entire hall started shaking from an earthquake, our body would not want to optimize digestion and absorption. The last thing you want to do is run to the bathroom, right? You want to get the hell out of here. So all your resources are going to go towards brain and muscle, and it's not going to go towards digestion. Same thing when you're stressing in front of a computer while eating. You're sending a signal to your body that this person is not ready to absorb nutrients. You're literally just shoveling food down. It's going straight to your large intestine without it passing through the small intestine, getting absorbed as nutrients. So I know this is a challenge for me. A lot of times I'm eating fast, and I have to make myself mindful. I'll take some deep breaths. I'll aim for as many bites as I can. I chew slowly, mindfully, so I can extract the most amount of nutrients from that food. A lot of questions about fasting. Fasting has become very fashionable now, so I want to say a quick few points about this. Intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, they're not quite the same thing. So intermittent fasting involves a minimum fast period of 12 hours. Some will say 24 hours. I'm not going to get that technical, but typically you want a minimum time of 12 to 14 hours. That might involve us skipping breakfast. Now keep in mind that a lot of us that are trying to be on a ketogenic diet, the process of ketosis, of forming ketones, can take a minimum of 16 to 18 hours or more. So I'll measure ketones occasionally in my blood, and I see for me on average it takes about 16 hours of fasting to get there. But this varies depending on your activity levels and other factors. Now, time-restricted eating, this is sort of, you can think of as subcategory of fasting, and what this basically means is we're compressing our eating window. So all the foods that you're eating throughout the day, can we limit that to, let's say, an 8-hour period? So when we say 16-8 fasting, a lot of my patients, I'm telling them that I want you to eat all your foods over an 8-hour window. That might be 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., it might be 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., but then you're giving your body 16 hours of rest in between. You can have non-caloric beverages, non-sweetened type things. You can have herbal teas and water, but this is going to give your liver an opportunity to cleanse a lot of those toxins, get rid of some of that extra sugar, and go from there. So that's time-restricted eating. And it really does have a lot of beneficial impacts in the patients that I see. Even my most stubborn patients that refuse to change what they eat, they acknowledge the fact that they're eating garbage, and I make a deal with them. I'm saying, listen, you're eating garbage. Do me a favor and eat your garbage between the hours of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., okay? And the interesting thing is Sachin Panda, who's one of the real thoughtful scientific people that is basically studying the beneficial impacts of this, he's seen basically that even people that are eating non-optimal foods, just by giving themselves a 16-hour recovery period, they still do better. They didn't do great, but their glucose levels get better, inflammation comes down because they're giving their liver some space. So, holiday eating's coming up, right? Thanksgiving, all this stuff. Try to time it out so you can feast during a limited period and then finish, right? Maybe you'll skip breakfast and get a workout in, and then you'll feast between 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever, and then you're done. And give your body time to recover. The next morning, go for a run, exercise, and then rinse and repeat. Okay, that might be something to think about during the holidays. Okay, I'm going to go past this because I want to have time for questions. I've got a lot of information on the ketogenic diet on my blog. These are the fat breakdowns. There are definite benefits. Some people can really do well on the ketogenic diet. It can have a lot of great anti-inflammatory and longevity benefits, but you do have to be aware of the fact that for some people, the ketogenic diet can cause more harm than good. So if you go to my blog, definitely look at that title, 7 Top Concerns, My Top Concerns About the Ketogenic Diet. In some of my patients who don't do it right, I've seen it raise inflammation, cause more weight gain, and starve people and cause more severe micronutrient deficiencies. So it doesn't work great for everyone. General rule, it tends to work great for guys, doesn't work very well for a lot of women, just like almost any other diet. I'm sorry, females out there. I don't know why diets do this to people, but yeah, ketogenic diet, you have to be very careful if we're not doing it in the right context. Okay, so we'll close up here and go to some Q&A right now. But my resources, again, I know I mentioned my blog quite a bit, so a few things I want you to be aware of is when you go to my blog, I'm adding more and more free ebooks. So if you click on the free ebook icon, you'll get free books on fatigue, cholesterol I just added, children's health and pregnancy, personalized nutrition. I've got some programs too that you can click on to learn about more. Yes, I got forced into using Instagram, but I'm doing that to show people how to eat specific foods, what exercises they can do. So if you use Instagram, you can follow me on Instagram as well too. Last thing I want to finish with is, because I'm so passionate about this, is I did create an animated interactive education program for kids and families. It's called the Whole Family Health Program, and it is a way that I've taught kids and teenagers how to learn about nutrition using animations like cars, vehicles, traffic parking diagrams. And I've had kids and teenagers that have told me that they want to go into medicine after learning this because it was just so interesting, believe it or not, you know? So it's a really cool thing. It teaches people what happens in muscles. So my boys can tell you more about it there. And for today, this is off the record, we don't have to record this part, I am actually using a coupon code CUPLIB for Coop Library, and that'll give you $20 off. So it's just an $80 one-time fee, and you will learn over 8 weeks everything that you need to know about nutrition, grocery lists, all that good stuff. So we'll end with that, and then let's open it up to questions.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Yes, it's just Coop Lib, so Coop Library, CUPLIB. CUPLIB, and my boys can give you more details. They're in the back, so. All right, so we got the microphone. Let's open it up to questions. And I'll leave maybe that screen up so you guys know which programs. Yeah, you guys can already form a line then, so there we go.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the artificial sweeteners question, and
Sure.
I know there's been a lot of diet soda stuff that's been around for a while. It's generally acknowledged not to be very good for you.
Yeah.
But then there's sugar alcohols that are pretty new to the market.
Yeah.
Allulose, erythritol.
Erythritol, yeah.
Things like this. And what's your view on them in terms of risk and benefit to using them?
Great question. So you're right. I mean, I kind of made a general statement about artificial sweeteners, but there is a whole range of sweeteners out there. And a lot of people on lower carb or ketogenic diets are using things like erythritol. And the sugar alcohols look like they're probably not as bad as the first generation of sweeteners that are out there. We don't know what the long-term impact it is. Probably has some mild to modest impact on the gut bacterial flora. But I would say for people doing lower carb diets that want to bake and they've got a sweet tooth, I think it's fine to use things like that. People also ask me, stevia is probably still one of the most natural. So if you get good quality stevia, plant-based, my dietitian that works in my office, she teaches people how to grow stevia and crush it and put it to sweeten their teas and things like that. That would be the optimal thing. But the erythritol, I'm pretty neutral on right now. So I'm not adversely against that. We'll have to look at what more long-term data shows. But if it limits people from eating sugar and fructose, I'm a fan of it right now as an interim sweetener. So great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great talk,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Ron. One quick question. You were talking about intermittent fasting and minimum to 12 to 14 hours. One challenge is skipping meals tends to be a trigger for some people with migraines. Do you have any tips if you're subject to migraines on how you might be able to approach intermittent fasting without the skipping the meals triggering migraines?
Yeah, so good point. So first of all, with meal skipping, is it a morning thing, like when you wake up? Do you know it's
Skipping
morning?
breakfast and lunch is
so
really
skipping
bad,
breakfast
yeah.
can be really tough. So the way and there are some people, they just, no matter what they do, they just feel weak if they don't have breakfast, right? So what I actually recommend they do is they try to finish dinner earlier. So one of my goals every day, from a metabolic perspective, despite these sort of hours that I talked about, what we're finding through scientific studies is the earlier we can finish dinner, the better it is for health. I actually aim for, can I finish dinner between 5 and 6? Believe it or not. And the reason I'm telling you that, this is important, I'm so glad you brought this question up, is because after the sun goes down, so I tell people your digestive hormones are kind of like a shop that's open during daytime hours. Once evening time sets in, those digestive hormones go to sleep. And now if we eat starchy foods after that period, a few things happen. You can't process these foods, so they'll go in the wrong direction. They'll get stored in the liver and the fat cells. Will cause more inflammation in the body. So the earlier we can feed that, eat that, optimally would be great. And then remember, your fasting period starts at that point. So that might allow you to have your breakfast at 6 or 7. Now, I know sometimes it's not practical. It might be tough. So if you get up and you're afraid of triggering a migraine, then have the highest quality breakfast that you can. Have some berries, maybe some Greek yogurt, something that's not going to cause major sugar swings. But I'm not anti-breakfast. Some people need to have it. And one other key thing is many of my people that are not metabolically adapted to fast, if they skip breakfast, they end up overeating a lot the second half of the day. And they're snacking 9, 10 p.m. That's not a good thing. I would rather have them eat breakfast to prevent the second half eating that goes longer. So there's some nuance to that. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Awesome.
question. Sure.
My question is, on the screen, you turned the page quickly.
Oh, yes.
And you mentioned the list of spring and summer vegetables. How about the winter?
Yes. Oh, did that not have a winter section on it?
It did to the right, but you turned the
Oh, I'm
screen
sorry.
and I
But you know
didn't
what the
get to
good news
write the
is?
list.
This is going to be recorded. You can watch this like your favorite movie as many times you want. It could be like Netflix. So do we know how long it takes before it comes on YouTube? About a week or
The
so?
winter vegetables. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have
and
YouTube.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
was
So you'll
just
get that
wondering
there.
if-
And sorry, I know it was a lot of slides, but you're right. I did flip by that
I
too
know
quickly. so.
broccoli was one and spinach, but I didn't
Yep,
get the
yep.
whole
And
list.
maybe at the end, when you come up, if you're around, I can pull that up. I'll take a picture of it for you, and you can have it for me. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi.
Yeah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
First is, if you're vegetarian, what's your view on, and you have a thyroid problem, what's your view on tofu?
Okay.
And the second is, what's your view on cooking in mustard oil?
Okay, great. Good two questions. So the first thing is, what about tofu? Or and so with tofu, again, you have to make sure that it's sourced really well. Okay, so make sure it's organic, preferably fermented if you can. Those sources tend to be much, much better. Fermented, obviously, things like miso, tempeh, those tend to be better sources. But a lot of the garden variety sort of tofu that's sold in grocery stores, if they're not that quality, then they can have some of that inflammatory effect. They can have different types of estrogenic hormonal effects. So again, high quality is what we want. So is soy milk something also that you consume, or? Okay, so with soy milk too, you want to make sure it's well sourced as well too, because if we're getting too much of a soy load from the wrong types of soy sources, then it might have some impacts on thyroid and inflammation in general. But I'm definitely open to high quality soy sources, and if it's fermented, that'd be the optimal way to take that. What was the second question, sorry?
Mustard oil.
And mustard oil. So mustard oil, I think still is a staple cooking oil. The ones that I talked about are the most heat stable and great. I think things like mustard oil and sesame oil, those should ideally be used as a finishing oil. So it's the oils that hit the pan that are the most susceptible to breaking down and causing oxidation. And if you're making, like I'm Bengali, so we love making mustard salmon every now and then, right? So my wife will make a mustard salmon, but typically she'll use an avocado oil. But then at some point in the cooking, then she'll sprinkle the mustard oil in there to basically get the benefits of that. So
it's heat.
it's like, yeah, exactly. It's the heat issue more than anything. So good. Yeah, but mustard oil is great otherwise. I love it. Yeah.
Hi. Since you're an advocate of turmeric, have you looked much into some of the other super nutrient powders or capsules such as moringa or amla? Do you have, those are quite popular. Do you have any
I have,
opinions
yeah.
on those?
And I don't necessarily specifically condone any brands, but for some of my patients that come in with significant autoimmune or inflammatory issues, there are specific brands I might recommend. And again, I use third-party vendor sources to make sure they're well sourced, because as you know, the supplement industry is there's just no regulation there at all. You go on Amazon, there's 1,000 different turmerics. But I would always recommend, this is a good question just by general supplements, I definitely have used turmeric supplements in some of my patients that need higher doses that they just can't get through diet throughout the day. And we found that with some of those sources, we might see their inflammatory markers get better and they can heal. And my general recommendation would be, again, use a third-party vendor that actually vets those resources to find. And some of the names you mentioned are good ones, but I would just make sure it's properly sourced.
I do for turmeric. I was just interested in the moringa or amla, since those are newer. There are vendors out there that, certify that it's organic and that it's tested.
Exactly, yeah.
You haven't done much research
I
into
haven't
those
done
two?
as much detailed research on that, so.
Okay.
I know you have an herbalist coming soon, so maybe that herbalist can help out. So,
Thank
your next speaker. Thank you. Yep, sure.
Hi. So I have a lot of fish in my diet. I do eat sardines and kippers and salmon and that. But now I'm concerned about the microplastics in our oceans and in our fish. And people have told me to stop eating fish.
I know.
Should I stop?
Yeah, so this is a good question, because the more we're looking at sourcing of fish, farmed and even the wild labeled fish, we are finding more toxins down in the water that are, showing up in, the fish meat and the fats themselves. Now, what I would tell you is, fortunately, so number one, just like the meats, you want to get the best sources that you can. So you want to get wild, organic, high-quality fish whenever you're getting it. I would say, based on sourcing right now, I probably wouldn't exceed intake to more than 2 or 3 servings a week. But even if you did consume more than that, the good thing about fish is basically because there's vitamin E and other antioxidants that are packaged into that, it does tend to dampen some of the toxin or inflammatory effects that you're getting from the phytoplastics and the other types of things that are coming through there. The other thing too is certain micronutrients can protect you against the toxic effects of those fish or mercury compounds, and selenium is one of them. So selenium you can get from just a single serving of Brazil nuts. So I just picked up Brazil nuts at Trader Joe's today, but people that have higher selenium levels through a natural diet, they tend to be more bulletproofed against the toxic effects of mercury and other things. So again, the big message is, again, if you're having, let's say, salmon, and you cook it with mustard oil, you're using a side of vegetable, these antioxidant cruciferous vegetables, they're going to protect your body quite a bit from those toxic effects, and then you're able to extract a lot of the good nutrient effects from the actual fish itself. So that's the way I sort of think about that.
But isn't wild worse now because they're going to get more microplastics?
Well, so wild, so that's one of the concerns. But again, it comes from a sourcing. So you're right. Even wild now, there's a lot of grocery stores that are getting wild from different sources. So you have to look at where the wild's coming from. In general, I'll tell you, Whole Foods tends to be pretty methodical. So their sources tend to be good for wild. So that's where I buy my fish. But I wouldn't go to other markets that have labeled wild, because I'm just not quite sure where it's coming from. So it's a big pain in the butt. You do have to kind of figure out where they're sourcing, and some people just ask the vendors, okay, where are you getting your wild salmon from? And if they can't answer that with a straight face, you might want to question what their sourcing is. So, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, so. Yeah, something to be aware of. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the interesting talk.
Thank you.
Whenever I have blood work, I always come up high blood sugar, so sort of pre-diabetic, and I'm not overweight. I work out a lot, and judging by this, I think I eat very well. But I'm just kind of having this aha moment here. I love to have a bowl of cereal right before I go to bed.
Yes.
And I eat my carbs then. Do you think that could be the culprit?
So, and is this your morning sugar that comes back elevated? Your fasting blood sugar, is that what's
yes,
okay?
It comes elevated.
Okay, so fasting blood sugars, guys, are very tricky. So first of all, fasting blood sugar, I always tell people, number one, fasting blood sugar is one single data point. Really what's going to cause disease in the long run is if 24/7 your glucose tends to stay elevated. So me, despite doing everything that I try to do, often I'll wake up and my fasting blood sugar some days, for whatever reason, is 104. And my last meal was 5 p.m. It was like a salad, So there's multiple things. So one thing is, if your A1Cs are good, your other inflammatory labs, lipids, everything's good, I wouldn't panic over that elevated once in a while fasting blood sugar. But also keep in mind there are non-nutritional factors that raise fasting blood sugar. If you're stressed when you go to bed at night, if you're going to bed late at night, the stress signal sends a signal to the liver to produce sugar in the mornings. It's unbelievable. Some days I'm like ketogenic and I'm like less than 50 grams of carb. I wake up with the blood sugar of 110. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that any stress signals in the evening can cause the liver to overproduce sugar in the morning. But luckily then when I check throughout the day and after meals, my sugar's fine after that. So my blood pressure used to go up every time I'd see that sugar. But I've talked to a lot of people that are in the health and wellness profession, and they see the exact same thing sometimes. So I'm not as worried. You have to look at it in the context of your other markers.
So the sleep, though, you said the sleep.
Oh, sleep's a huge factor. I mean, sleep is a separate topic, but sleep, especially the first half of the night, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., that is when our body produces a lot of anti-diabetic, glucose elevating hormones. So when I have patients tell me that, hey, I got 8 hours of sleep, but they tell me they're sleeping from 1 to 9, I'm like, that is destroying brain health, glucose health, everything. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. is a different animal than 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. I'm getting a lot of uncomfortable looks from the audience because I know a lot of people like to sleep at 1 or 2. A lot of my techies are like, I'm getting 8 hours. I'm like, you know, the drug companies have convinced you that 8 hours is all that matters. Bedtime is huge. So I'm not a big fan of metaphors and all these sayings that we have, but one thing I do tell people is early to bed, early to dine. I mean, if you can dine earlier and you can go to bed earlier, that will have tremendous impact on your health. And I used to be a late nighter as well, but now it's like I'm getting ready, my pajamas are on at 9 p.m., and I'm out by 10. And before I used to think, oh my God, I have this work to do, but because I have that set in my brain, I'm so much more efficient during the day. I do not mess around because I have to get my work done. Like I'm looking at the clock, I'm like, I'm having dinner in an hour and a half. I like mentally already figure out what do I have to do to have my dinner between 5 and 6 p.m. Like once you think like that, you'll do great. And the interesting thing I didn't also mention is people that eat dinner earlier, they get a higher percent of deep phase sleep. So when you eat later and you go to bed later, you might get 8 hours and you still wake up feeling like a zombie because the percent of deep phase sleep that you get is much lower. So these have major impact on that, and that can actually improve your blood sugar. When I sleep well, even if I didn't eat that well the day before, my blood sugars are much better. So think about sleep and stress as being non-dietary factors that can raise that sugar. And we can all use help with sleep and stress, right? So,
great advice,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for a lot of insight.
Sure.
Do you have any recommendations for those of us who have osteoporosis?
Right, and again, so one thing, definitely go to my blog and put in osteoporosis because calcium is a very confusing thing with osteoporosis, right? Because our traditional approach to osteoporosis is just take more calcium supplements, drink more milk, and that's the end of the story. But what I want you to think about is calcium supplementation might make sense, but I would say that's a minor secondary factor. For osteoporosis prevention and reversal, number one by far is weight-bearing exercises. Walking, light weightlifting, swimming doesn't count because obviously that's buoyant, but any sorts of exercises you can do, that load will actually help increase the density to the bone. So that's number one. Number two is, are we getting enough vitamin D? So vitamin D through sunlight exposure, through foods that are vitamin D rich, these are key. And if you're low, if your doctor checks your level, and doctors don't routinely check it, if you get a level checked and it's low, you might need some supplementation. But I focus more on weight-bearing exercises, vitamin D. Those are the staples. And then if we find that maybe there's some room for calcium supplementation, maybe that makes sense. But again, I see a lot of Asians and Indians in my practice, and osteoporosis is rampant. And they're all chewing calcium supplements like it's candy, but they're still low bone density because they sit all day. So they're not doing the exercises to actually improve bone density. So if you do that, that'll make a big difference. For my mom, I actually hired a trainer for her just to learn how to do these weight-bearing exercises properly because she was just walking, and walking's good, that's weight-bearing, but I'm getting her to do something heavier just to trigger more bone density growth with exercise. So, great. So we'll take one more maybe. Okay. Yep.
I realize that you have a long wait list for consultations and medical appointments. I was just wondering if you have any recommendations for, other doctors, maybe especially ones to see about gut health or weight loss?
Yeah, so I would say in general, we can talk offline too after the talk, but in general, there is a field of medicine called integrative and functional medicine. And these types of doctors tend to be very good at doing the types of testing for gut health and micronutrients. And so within our medical group, we actually do have some integrative and functional medicine groups. So if you literally put in IFM or integrative functional medicine or functional medicine doctors, and for our group it'd be Sutter Health or Palo Alto Medical Foundation, you'll find listings for some of those doctors. The bad news is because they're so popular, they all have long wait lists, so it's tough to get them in time, but it's worth the wait. Just find a practitioner. Even for me, I know it's a few months, but I tell people none of this is urgent in terms of you got to be seen tomorrow, but luckily there's a growing number of doctors that are being trained in this area, so you'll be in good shape. Good. Great stuff. Okay, I'll start packing up. If anybody has any individual questions, feel free to come up, but thank you for having me today. Hope that was helpful.